Hello everyone. My name is Sandrine Salerno. I'm the director of Sustainable Finance, but also Building Bridges. Welcome to the second webinar on nature. Thank you very much to Marianne R. that I will present in a few seconds and all our amazing speaker to that webinar. Remind that in 2 weeks and a half, we will have the fourth edition of Building Bridges in Geneva. It will take place the first week of October from the 2nd to the 5th of October. And this webinar is one of the lead-up events to this 2023 edition of Building Bridges. That will be, by the way, I open amazing edition. We have our whole community, but also we will welcome the open launch of TNFD with Elizabeth Mrema and our team. There will be also UNFCCC doing the second Sharm el Sheikh dialogue in building bridges, and also a community of social entrepreneurs, seed stars among us. If you don't know yet, we have a great app, BB Connect. So go on your app store and download the app. You will have the whole program. You can, of course, see all the activities. We will have more than 65 events during Building Bridges, a summit with an amazing lineup of speakers. And remember that the last webinar for this 2023 edition will be on sustainable finance trend, taking place September 21, so in like 10 days, a bit less. And now it is my pleasure to give the floor to Marianne R. Marianne, you are nature finance lead at Global Canopy, but also technical sector guidance lead and metrics at TNFD. You will moderate the discussion. You're a very keen person for building bridges. You have been in most of our edition and discussion. So thank you very much for this great moderation. Thank you to all the speakers. And I give you the floor, Marianne.
Thank you so much, Sandrine. And it's such an honor to be able and a pleasure to be able to moderate this warm-up session to Building Bridges 2023. As Sandrine said, I've had the pleasure to be at almost all of the Building Bridges events, and they are an extraordinary community. But for this webinar, as Sandrine also said, we warmly welcome you. We can see you're coming from all corners of the world, and it's a true pleasure because we are here to build bridges not only between geographies, but also between different parts of the system that needs to shift to deliver on nature.
We have a great panel of speakers here for this webinar. I will start by you, Jessica Smith, working for UNEP FI, Judson Berkey, working for UBS, also member of the TNFD work group. You will be also at Building Bridges for the technical launch of the TNFD, and Axel Joss. I don't know if I pronounced it well. Okay, cool. So I don't exactly know who was supposed to start the discussion, but maybe you can help me. It was you, Jessica?
I think it was Judson first.
Yeah, why don't I just try and kick off with a little bit of explanation on TNFD and where we are.
Okay, so let's start with Judson.
Yeah, give the context for people. So, first, thank you very much to Building Bridges for organizing this, and you certainly we've all become very flexible in light of some of the disruptions that are happening around the world. So it's great to see we're able to manage this on our little webinar as well. And I think all these disruptions honestly do remind us of the importance of the topic that we're here to discuss today in many ways. But let me just start by putting some context on the TNFD and what it is, what it's trying to do. As Sandrine kindly mentioned, I've been part of the actual task force. That's 40 global firms that have been working the past 2 years to try and develop a set of recommendations that will be published next Monday through a launch event in New York. And I guess as you probably can guess from the naming of it, TNFD, it is in many ways trying to achieve the same thing that TCFD did for climate, and really trying to be part of filling in a broader set of activities that really are motivating topics around nature. And I think they are a set of complementary type activities. Internally at UBS, we talk a little bit about nature following a bit of a climate playbook, and that we have now a global agreement, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which I'm sure Jessica and others will talk to, and that really our Paris Agreement for nature, so to speak. We have efforts underway by central banks and regulators to get going on nature topics. The NGFS just last week came out with their conceptual framework for nature risk management, so it's really starting activities like they did with climate as well. In the financial sector, we have new initiatives like the Nature Action 100, a collaboration of investors to really try and collaborate and work on nature topics collectively through their stewardship and engagement processes. And then we have disclosure and the TNFD and disclosure framework. So I do see it as one of these complementary pieces that's trying to fill in the puzzle to really motivate action around nature. And I think that's probably the second point, which is really trying to motivate and catalyze action. I know it's called a disclosure framework, and so in some sense that may just imply just about transparency. But certainly in our view in the task force, and I think as we think about this at UBS as well, transparency has the power to transform. And we really do see this as part of a transformative effort to transition essentially large parts of our economies that are having very visible negative impacts on nature, as have been documented through some of the great work by leading scientific organizations. There are large dependencies on nature, as other groups have also helped document the work done by UNEP, say with the Encore tool. And so this effort in the TNFD really is trying to obviously put out a set of recommendations that firms can use for disclosure, but really and very much also give them guidance on how to even get going on the nature topic, how to think through their impacts and dependencies, how to then translate that into understanding risks and opportunities, and then also really trying to drive forward some of the actions to start to achieve some of these transitions or transformations that we know need to happen over the coming decades. And I think the third thing that the TNFD really is trying to do is to be a bit of a consolidation point as well, to really bring together a lot of the good activity that's occurring and a number of other initiatives and forums. Again, I mean, great work done in UNEP FI, and I'm privileged there to be part of the work group that's working on target setting guidance for financial institutions. There's great work going on in places like Finance for Biodiversity, a bit more focus on asset managers. There's the emerging work of the Science-Based Targets Network. Obviously, there's all the scientific research has been done by a number of other knowledge partners that are part of the overall TNFD effort. So the TNFD itself has really tried to draw on a lot of existing knowledge and initiatives, and you bring that together in some way and figure out how to consolidate it for purposes of really getting firms going on nature-related disclosure. So the goal really is to put out a framework next week, and I'm sure it won't be perfect. We worked very, very expeditiously over the past 2 years and probably didn't get everything right. But I think it is enough to get firms really moving and to start to catalyze this work, to continue that effort to complement other initiatives and really be that point of consolidation for a lot of the focus around this. And so we're hopeful, we'll see how it goes, but our hope is that it really does support firms and get activity moving. And certainly, it's not the expectation that everyone does everything from the very beginning. It is a journey, much like TCFD has been a multi-year journey for the financial sector. But we do believe that what we'll publish next week will give a very good starting point, and then that will be part of an overall sort of process for firms really to get going on understanding their nature impacts dependencies, but also much more importantly in some ways, really thinking through the risks and the opportunities attached to that.
Great.
So let me pause there as a bit of an opening introduction and pass back to, I guess, Marianne. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, and sorry for that, it froze. So thank you so much, Judson, for sharing with us your perspectives on the barriers. So turning onto the government role, Jessica, we see that governments around the world have begun to really codify aspects of the TCFD recommendations into policy and regulation. A number of these jurisdictions have taken some time to get there since the TCFD framework was launched in 2015. But alongside of that, we have seen even more stock exchanges, including TCFD or parts of the recommendations into ESG listing requirements. So what, in your view, can be done to ensure that TNFD does not take as many years as it has for the TCFD to become mandated, but also to become part of infrastructure provider requirements such as stock exchanges? Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Marianne. Well, I'll just briefly say that Unipify is an interface between the commitments that are made at the United Nations, and we have a membership network of 500 banks and insurers. We also work with the front end of the 5,000 Principles for Responsible Investment signatories, so asset managers and asset owners. And, we really want to make sure that the commitments and the ideals that are made in agreements like the Global Biodiversity Framework are carried out with industry leadership, and that the financial sector is really able to chart a pathway of how these commitments can be realized across the entire financial system. So Unipify was actually one of the leads. I was very fortunate when I joined Unipify to be given this task to lead for Unipify amongst the 4 partners who were also including Global Canopy, UNDP, and WWF. But we really wanted it to be a market-led task force. So we were thrilled to have members like Judson, who's put so much energy into the task force. But the intent was always to be a transformational initiative that was picked up in policy. And indeed, it's exciting to see how the TCFD, the sibling task force, is being picked up in policy. And I'm actually extremely positive that the pathway for TNFD to be picked up into policy is much shorter. First of all, we have clear language in Target 15 of the Global Biodiversity Framework calling on all countries who are party to the agreement, so that's 196 countries, to put disclosure and assessment regulations into policy where it's relevant. Now, we know in countries there's a huge variety of circumstances. If you imagine, the circumstances of South Sudan versus Singapore, the context is completely different. It has to be scaled. But one of the challenges that we have in bringing nature-related disclosures into policy is that the most affected markets, the most exposed markets, are generally those in the global south who have the least means to diversify their markets as quickly as possible. So we do need to be aware of the unevenness of how this issue affects various jurisdictions and markets, but also move ahead, because simply as the Dasgupta review outlined, our markets are currently damaging nature, and we are counting the goals for the economy, and we're not counting the goals against nature, and it's simply unsustainable, and we're coming out of planetary boundaries, and we are seeing the effects of that already. So there is a shorter route, I do believe. From the Unipify piloting program, we had 40 financial institutions piloting on many different sectors and geographies. One of the easy routes in is to build from what's already underway in terms of the TCFD in each financial institution. So there are, many, many rounds of effort to make sure that TCFD assessment and disclosures are robust. And, there continues to be strengthening of data and requirements, and now more legislation coming on. And I saw just this morning in the FT, the state of California, which is a huge market, has legislated climate disclosures from their companies and financial institutions. So I think there's a lot of progress. I also see that nature is an issue that is unlikely to face a similar backlash, in the sense that it's very clear the dependency is on nature. And it's an issue that I think is much harder to politicize, because all of us has some interaction with nature, and we see it, all around us. And I think it's something that, we can all relate to. So I do see the prospects for TNFD to proceed as very positive. And again, picking up from Judson's point, we do need market leadership, but that's not enough to bring the entire market within planetary boundaries. So we do need legislation and regulation as well.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And if you continue to look a bit in the crystal ball, and we do need leadership also from jurisdictions, and you mentioned just California as sort of a subnational jurisdiction. But in the crystal ball, do you see any jurisdictions that would take on that leadership? What's your expectations?
Well, Just recently, I didn't plant this question with you, but just recently with the G20 declaration, I saw a lot of leadership from India in hosting the G20. And effectively, the outcome from the G20 statement was that all of the G20 and effectively, leaders of our 20, most active economies are all readying for nature-related assessment and disclosure in their markets. So that was really, I think, a global south figure bringing this to the attention of their peers and carrying it forward. So I expect many jurisdictions, I won't name them, but I do expect many global south jurisdictions to show a lot of leadership on this topic and also show how it's relevant to core business, to the systemic health of their financial system and their economies. Impact is lovely, and if we can achieve positive impact above that, that's great. But I think we need to think about the core stability of economies in the global south. How do we meet human needs with the natural resources and assets that we have, and making this issue one that is clearly relevant? The World Bank did some fantastic work last year with emerging economies, showing the nature risk and dependencies was very, very high, up into the 70s% for emerging markets, and lower, maybe 40s and 50s percentage, depending on the economy in global north markets. But this is really an important core stability issue for many global south countries who are directly dependent on nature in their economic activities.
Thank you so much, Jessica. So you won't mention jurisdictions, which is completely understandable, but we have Axel, you in a sense represent the Norwegian one. And you also have, and we also have the pleasure to have a number of task force members from Norway, Grieg Seafood and NBIM. But you represent the Norwegian Nature Risk Commission, or you're chairing it. So it would be really helpful for all of us to understand a bit more what's the mandate of your commission, how can we leverage that. But really what I wanted to pick up on with you is what Jessica also mentioned, that TNFD is a market-led initiative, and it's really it's science-oriented, but practice-informed. So it's really been iterated and piloted. So more than 200 institutions have piloted. And what has come out very clearly from these piloting is that a big barrier is the lack of data, especially standardized data that can be aggregated across portfolios. So it's really a barrier to TNFD adoption. But we also learned from the climate space that a lack of standardized data can also act as a convenient excuse not to accelerate your disclosure on these types of topics as quickly as one would hope to. So how do you see the role of your commission and other regulators now needing to step in and help to really equip the market to be able to issue this type of standardized data? Over to you, Axel.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne, and thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be part of this and to learn from it. But starting out just a bit on sort of my commission or our commission in the background. This was appointed by the Norwegian government in June last year, and we are to deliver a white paper to the Minister for Climate and Environment before Christmas. And the mandate is very well connected to TNFD and to international developments, which is a good start, and I think is a strength of it. And the starting point is to describe nature risk using what is applicable from climate risk, both the Norwegian and the sort of international understanding of climate risk. And in that sense, in the same spirit as TNFD is learning from TCFD, I think. And then to consider how Norwegian industries and sectors are exposed to physical nature risk, and industries and sectors that includes the public sector and the financial sector. So contrary to the many approaches, we also think that the government in its various forms also needs to be made accountable and to report. We are also to look into how Norwegian industries and sectors are affected by transition risk, again in the same spirit as the TCFD, because transition risk is an important part and integrated with physical risk, because impacts will converge into transition risk unless we address them. Then we are to address this at the national level. Then we have your point, Jessica, about the impact at sort of the country level, national level, and financial stability and sort of that context. And then finally, which is very tightly connected to TNFD, how do people actually analyze, handle, and report on nature risk today, and how do you recommend that they do it going forward? And that's also addressing your question, Marianne, about what is our role. I mean, first it is to recognize, and again, we haven't delivered a report, so take it with some caveats. It's to recognize good initiatives, be it by the EU, be it by TNFD, be it by others, and sort of what is applicable, how can that be used in Norwegian context. It's then to use the power of a commission and the government, if we land well, to also help on the standardization, help on the priorities, help also on how can we, in a small, highly digital country like Norway, see that reporting into also nature risk could be integrated in existing reporting mechanisms, existing databases. I'm on the side, well, my day job is an empirical finance researcher, and we have fantastic data. If we get nature risk data into this as well, we can also analyze, we can develop and assess policies, and things can move on. Then finally, we may give some normative advice in terms of how this should be done. I still think that the TNFD approach, where you have had an exemplary open process with hearings, with inviting the whole world to comment, is the right way of raising awareness and getting legitimacy for the solution. So these things need to work in parallel. But again, standardized data, making it comparable, making it reusable over time between institutions, between financial institutions, that takes down the reporting burden and increases adaptation and effects on behavior. Thank you.
Do you expect, Axel, the market to deliver that by itself, or are you seeing more of a regulatory sort of push for that?
I think it sort of needs both. Because if you only have a regulatory push, you will get a reluctant response only by those that are really forced to do it. If you get market and market association buy-in, you also get a wholehearted response in developing reporting and standardization that works. And also this challenge which relates to less resourceful reporters. I mean, Jessica talked about the poorer countries. How do they build institutions around reporting? The same goes for the SMEs, which are an important part of the economies in most countries. How do they report in a way that's effective and efficient? And I think that's why you need the buy-in, and again, you need a sort of a restrained approach to some of these reporting initiatives, that we get what is important, but not everything we can think of.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to hear, Justin, whether you have any sort of reflections on learning, since you've been so involved in the work on the finance sector metrics under the TNFD, and also in terms of this data question. And how do you see from UBS and other banks' side, what are the real barriers, and what can be done sort of short term for you to start to really disclose on these metrics?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there is a key difference between nature and climate, and it is, I guess probably two key differences really. I mean, one is just multivariate in its topics, and you don't have that singular focus on CO2 emissions, and then as an analog to that, you really don't have that singular unit of measure that you can really you drive action with in terms of you're trying to drive towards net zero. So we need to find a way to sort of deal with multiple topics and have multiple indicators. And certainly there has been some efforts to drive this out already. For example, the European Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, its adverse impact indicators, it does address a lot of these sorts of topics. And within the TNFD, we have tried to be guided by the science. So we have looked at the pressures or the drivers of nature loss and biodiversity loss as outlined by the International Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, the IPBES research, essentially the IPCC for nature, and try to frame our metrics thinking around that. Now, I think it will admittedly take some time for companies to be able to measure those things in a consistent and comparable way, and to report that out over time. There's the challenge of value chains. So the location aspect, of nature is also an additional challenge here, because it's not just what you do in terms of emitting, say, carbon emissions for climate, but it also matters very much where you do it, and in terms of, are you actually deforesting virgin lands, or are you building on land that's been converted centuries ago? And so there is an additional aspect here in terms of trying to measure things on a very location specific basis. And for some industries, it really is much more about their value chains and their direct operations. So all sorts of complexities there, and I don't want to minimize those, but I also think to your question, we shouldn't let those be barriers to actually starting to do things and sort of incrementally building up over time. For the financial sector specifically, there is this dependency clearly between the financial sector obviously needs to have information and data from our clients and in the companies that we either lend to, or we invest in, or we insure. And so there is a data chain that needs to be built up there, where companies report on data that then provides additional information to financial institutions, who can then factor that into their own sort of assessments and analytics. But again, at the first instance, I think we can start simple in a way, but in a way that can be effective. And in terms of just thinking through, at least on a sector basis, what are some of the key sectors that have the largest impacts and dependencies, and understanding within a financial institution's portfolios how connected they are to those sectors, either through their lending, through their investments, through their insurance portfolios, and then probably most importantly, what actually is their approach to trying to interact and manage the risks attached to that sector. I think a lot of financial institutions like my own have built up over the years a set of policies around how we interact with key sectors, be it forestry, be it fisheries, be it other areas. In some cases, those have some red lines in them, activities we will not do, or we do not want to be connected to, for various reasons. And in other cases, we will impose enhanced due diligence requirements on engaging with a certain client from a certain sector or a certain activity. So there are ways to start to already think through the issues, and to start to take actions that don't necessarily require having to measure everything in absolute precision. Because the other thing we probably need to be cognizant of when it comes to nature is, again, we don't have that singular goal, net zero. We obviously have this framing nature positive, and that's very, very helpful framing, I think. But what that actually means is I think a little bit unclear at times, although just this week there was some very good work put out by the combination of the World Economic Forum, the WBCSD, and the Business for Nature collaboration, which tried to sort of go on a sector by sector basis and put some greater specifics around what nature positive can mean in terms of activities. So I think we have some tools that can get us going, and obviously it's nice to measure, and it is, there's the old adage that what gets measured gets managed. But I do think we can start to move forward without necessarily having to feel like we need to have the precise measures, and we need to have the complete data sets, and we need to have everything very consistent over time. And really, to Jessica's very good point, I'm not sure the state of the environment really permits that or allows for that. We do need to start some of these transformations now, and in some cases, I do think we know some of the transformations that really do need to start to occur. So in that sense, I think individual sectors, can have some vision of where they need to get to. Financial institutions obviously can think through what are some of the risks and opportunities attached to that, and very importantly, we also need governments to start to take action to put in place the policy frameworks really to drive out some of those changes.
Thank you so much, Judson, and thank you so much also for sort of starting to scratch the surface of how to get started, because I think that's the question that constantly comes back to us, is how do I get started, right? There is a degree of being overwhelmed with, not having that unit of a carbon ton for us to get started. So thank you for that, and also for signposting to the need to build bridges, for just the nature positive definition needs to come somewhere from the science community or the intergovernmental community, that we need that cross collaboration, and also for bridging to the next chapter of our conversation. And I just want to highlight again, if anybody has questions, reflections, provocations, anything, put it in the chat or the Q&A. I see it's empty at the moment, but just to remind you that it's an option for you to interact directly with our panel. But now we really want to turn the last chapter of the conversation more from barriers of adoption to opportunities to transition. And I think Judson already started on that conversation. So that requires a focus, as we also heard from Judson, on material sectors. We can actually zoom in on the sectors most in need of transition. And we know that 80% of biodiversity loss is driven by the food we eat and the food system. So it could be probably a pretty good place to really look as a place to get started. And in addition, it's a huge opportunity because the agri-food system globally is worth approximately $8 trillion annually, but the negative impact are valued much higher at 12 trillion USD. So transition efforts is something we can't ignore if we want to create a nature positive world. So therefore we will start to discuss transition, and I'll turn back to you, Axel, and the work of your commission, because you said in our prep discussion that disclosure is nice to have, but cannot stand by itself. It needs to drive behavior change in terms of how financial markets are actually increasingly starting to internalize the cost of nature externalities via higher risk pricing of nature negative activities and rebates on nature positive activities. So I'm curious if you can share with the audience how you are looking at this in the Nature Risk Commission and the recommendation or white paper that you said you're coming out with. Are you going as far as setting targets for the Norwegian financial system when it needs to be not only net zero carbon emissions, but also nature positive, so we can look at you as a leader jurisdiction? Can you help us understand a bit more what you're discussing? And you can also share a bit more on your sort of broader ecosystem thinking.
I can't share too much of the Commission's conclusions. And I think in terms of targets, a lot of the Montreal Agreement targets are effectively setting the ambitions anyway. So we have enough of objectives and challenges in that. And the question is then more, how do we implement this into policies? And then clearly, when we have a mandate to handle and analyze, handle and report on nature risk, then it is simply about how to do this. And I think the part of this is then the mandatory requirement for reporting, and I mean what needs to be done. But it's also at the micro level, how do we make sure that reporting ends up in action? And this is more personal than necessarily what comes in the report, but this is where we are. I think that if companies expose not only their nice objectives of improvement, but they also expose where these are the 5 activities we're going to do next year. For example, we have a Norwegian challenge with our hydroelectric power plants where a lot of fish gets killed because of they're going through the turbines. And then there are mechanisms to avoid it. And if a large power energy company has 10 dams and they say, well, currently we're killing fish in all of them, next year we're going to kill fish in only half of them. Okay, that's a visible, transparent objective which can be announced ex ante, measured, exposed, be visible to investors, lenders, governments, and power by customers. And again, taking it from the pure disclosure into a narrow, financially interested community into wider also market exposure. And if you're then able to also make consumer and financial sector databases where these things are exposed, I think we can see more action following in disclosure.
Thank you so much, Axel.
Very concrete.
Quite concrete, yeah, exactly. And we're definitely looking forward to reading more in the white paper when it comes out on that thinking, both from the Commission and from yourself. We are lucky to have a question from Andre in the chat. And I think both Judson and Jessica, it's something maybe you could help us reflect on. So could we consider rebates in the insurance premium for those companies and banks that include nature risk disclosure? Could we also consider offsets in the same watersheds? That becomes quite precise. Would you like to reflect on it, first Jessica and then you, Judson.
Sure. Maybe I'll take the insurance angle and then Judson could speak to the banking angle. So for the past, I think it's been about 2.5 years now, we've been collaborating with the Principles for Sustainable Insurance. First of all, to ready the insurance industry and get the insurance industry to feed into the Global Biodiversity Framework goals and targets. And then also now to consider how the insurance industry can respond to those, similar to the way that they respond to the Paris Climate Agreement. So we're very happy. It's actually today. And again, this is just a coincidence, but actually we launched today Nature Positive Insurance at the Unipify Regional Roundtable in Madrid. And our colleagues over at WWF have also launched with Deloitte Underwriting Our Planet, also at our roundtable in Madrid today, which looks at underwriting for nature and climate. So those are two great publications I encourage everyone to have a look at. But one of the key points is the question of insurance for what? So insurance should be aligned to the outcomes that we want to see in society, and it should be aligned to the physical limits of our planet. We simply cannot go beyond the physical limits of our planet. So we can use insurance much more creatively. And there's a lot of breakthroughs using the concept of parametric insurance or index-linked, index-triggered insurance products. So there's a huge possibility for the insurance industry to become more aligned around nature risk. And we've had a number of leading insurers that are mentioned in the two reports with a lot of breakthroughs, including Swiss Re's ecosystem index, which is very innovative. So there's a lot more that the insurance sector can do. I think the point of can we start having rebates and premiums reduced if you are acting in line with natural limits, I think that's a fantastic direction to go in. And that's exactly how the financial sector can use the lever of finance to align the activities in the real economy as closely as possible to the goals that society has set and the natural limits that we're already aware of, that we are getting information and feedback both from science and then also from our lived experience. I have to say, some of the work that we launched over the summer, it was during the absolute peak of the heat wave. So it felt like the case was being made for us as we kind of sweated through the heat wave to communicate our work. But, many people around the world are experiencing natural limits in different, very difficult ways. And we're able to make the case for insurance very obviously when we see, floods or droughts or other natural events that are really illustrating why we need to act quickly.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And we have quite a number of questions just feeding the chat at the moment. I think you and everybody really thanking you for all the insights you've already shared, and that's provoked more reflection. So I think, Judson, we also have additional questions, but if you want to reflect on the first one, and then we have a second one, which could go for you, Axel and/or Judson, which is one of our participants, Jared. He would like to hear a reflection on where the responsibility for nature transition falls between asset owners versus asset managers. Do you want to share some reflections, Judson?
Yeah, sure. Let me take up the banking point, the asset point, maybe even the follow-on question that raises the topic of can economics really address the issues that we're fundamentally trying to address. And I do think they're all somewhat interrelated. And I think Jessica did a great job to highlight sort of the role that the insurance sector can really play. And I think equally with the banking sector or asset managers, asset owners. Essentially, I think what we're trying to do is to make sure that the externalities get internalized at some level, and we recognize economic value. And I think on this topic, essentially what we're trying to achieve is that companies really start to understand the longer term trends at play and start to recognize that into their own business strategy decisions. And I think your value can manifest in several forms. I think the extent a company can de-risk its supply chain, that has value to it. And so the more it understands potential physical risks in future, if the natural environment continues to degrade, it can take action today to potentially start to address that some of within its sphere of influence in its value chain, or alternatively, encourage others to act. I think that is real economic value for a company, and that is important to them to understand how that issue is likely to evolve and what they can do about that. But that gets to the core of their business decisions. Likewise, to the extent that a company faces potential transition risk ahead because policy may shift, and I think Axel did a great job to outline, highlight the fact that the global biodiversity framework does have some very clear objectives in it. Whether it's protecting 30% of land and seas, whether it's reducing pollution by 50%, whether it's addressing subsidies that have nature negative impacts today. So the extent that governments really follow through, and that's an if. I mean, as we've seen with climate, it is an if. The politics can be difficult, but if that really starts to follow through, then that does start to change the calculus in which a number of sectors operate. And so again, companies need to reflect on that. And in the financial sector, we obviously need to be thinking about understanding that, because we're interested in obviously the performance of our investments. We're interested in getting our loans being repaid. And so we need to understand sort of how sectors may evolve and how companies are positioning themselves, and then what that means for essentially the financial capital that we have put into a sector and into a company. So this really does get to the core economic decision making of individual companies and of the financial sector, if done well. But I do take the point that you're thinking that pure economics are going to address climate and broader nature issues, is asking a lot. And this is where government policies absolutely need to come into play. We really do need, in my big if point, we need basically governments to follow through, to start to put in place the frameworks and shape the markets. Your markets don't exist on their own. Your markets are shaped by rules, and those rules can be developed as standards in amongst private actors, or they can be developed as regulations. And certainly I think in the case of trying to address some of these broader systemic planetary boundaries where we have this collective action problem, I do think governments really do need to play a very strong role, as with climate. Now, thankfully, we have a process for that. We have these national biodiversity strategies and action plans that have been around for a number of years. Maybe they haven't always been utilized as well as they should, but certainly that structure is in place, just like the NDCs, by countries for climate. So that's in place. Number of countries have frameworks in place. And here in Switzerland, next year the government needs to define the second phase of its own national biodiversity strategy, which was first developed back in 2014. In Europe, we have the whole program around the European Green Deal, which really is going almost sector by sector, topic by topic. There's the farm to fork strategy, there's a circular economy strategy, there's a plastic strategy. So I think all these efforts are needed, and they all need to be self-reinforcing. I think as the policies get clear, as that provides certainty to sectors, then that obviously provides the clarity that companies need to make long-term investments. Because in many cases, we're talking long-term investments here. We're talking about re-engineering basic activities. We're talking about shifting core products. And we're talking about changing supply chains, and that's not something that's done in a quarter or even a year. That's multi-year to decade process. So companies need that signal of where they need to go. They need that investment certainty, and that obviously can also provide the information that the finance sector can use to understand how things will evolve, and therefore where the opportunities are. Because this is an opportunity story, at least from our perspective at UBS. I mean, it's about essentially financing the future and finding the companies that are going to be the winners in the future, and that's what we want to be their partner, and as they need finance, we want to be with them, and so there is great opportunity here for the finance sector. But I don't want to minimize the challenge here, or to give the view that any one part of this overall equation is going to drive it forward. Companies, finance sector, governments, we're all in this together, and even us as individuals, as in our own personal capacities, have a role to play. So it's a big challenge we face, but I think it's an incredible opportunity. This is like the Industrial Revolution of 100 years ago, and certainly the ones who do this well and get it right, will definitely be rewarded economically.
Thank you so much, Judson, also for highlighting the difference between TCFD was a material risk framework, but TNFD is actually a risk and opportunity management framework, right? So it's as much an opportunity as a risk story, but also for highlighting that it's already material. to de-risk your value chains, etc. Axel, would you share some reflections on Gerard's question on where the responsibility for the nature transition falls between asset owners and asset managers?
I think it's a shared responsibility. We need asset managers like the UBSs and others to offer products where you really see that both nature risk and opportunities are handled. Either that you're investing in funds, etc., that do fund transition and innovation into nature positive initiatives, or that you have certain risk management strategies that avoid continued nature exposure. And that these products are coming. These products are also incentivized from the asset managers, regulators and expectations. But asset owners, they are the responsible. We are responsible as individuals and representatives of asset owners into selecting where to place this capital. And then, of course, as a finance professor, there's always this thing: is this priced in a market or not, and how to do it right, and all that. But I think the expectation from asset owners towards asset managers is a driving force for the development of these kind of products.
Thank you so much, Axel. And we're having many more questions come in. I don't think we have the time to reflect on all of them. So we will see how we can get back to you in a structured way. But there is one that a lot of them goes back to the data question and challenge and opportunity. And I think one is from Michael, and he talks about the fact that nature is complex, therefore the data stack will also be quite complex. And how do we make sure that financial analysts will be able to verify that the information presented is actually true and complete? Do you want to share with us, Judson, from your perspective? How do you see that from a banking perspective?
Yeah, it's a fair point to get a challenge on. I think at some level, that the financial sector is a recipient of data. It's not going to be an independent validator of data, and so the first obligation obviously starts with companies, particularly if they're operating under a regulatory requirement to disclose certain data. That obviously they need to they comply with that regulatory requirement. But I do think there's a big role here on this broader sustainability topic, honestly, for the audit community. I think you're really going to see that next year with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive coming from Europe, and the fact that auditors have to sign off those accounts. And so I think there is going to be a need, honestly, a challenge for the audit community really to come up to speed on these broader sustainability topics, because they're going to play a critical role to help essentially validate data in disclosures by companies.
Thank you so
Axel,
much.
I think you had a hand up, so if you want to jump in.
I think one of the challenges there to move from greenwashing to reliable data is that the auditors are to audit the outcomes and results and not only the processes. Because then we get reliable data, not only that they say, yes, the company has been doing things that we think are helpful, they should also be made responsible for the actual data coming out of it. But that's more a personal point. But I think that again, this whole thing of avoiding self-reported greenwashing motivated reporting, we don't need that.
And do you see the directive pushing in that direction for process-oriented audits, or more on the outcomes?
I think, well, again, a personal reflection, I think there is a risk from a very risk-averse profession, the auditors, to try to avoid taking responsibility for the actual measures and only responsibility for the process. This is certainly a debatable point, but Judson, what are your views there?
Yeah, in some ways, it may also depend upon the level of assurance that they're being asked to provide. A limited assurance audit is different from a reasonable assurance audit, which is what a typical financial statement audit operates under today. So yes, I do think there is this kind of point to watch, I guess, in terms of what level of insurance auditors provide. But ultimately, I do think you're going to need that sort of infrastructure if we're really talking about sort of mainstreaming your sustainability type disclosure across economies. I think it does need to be integrated into some of these core processes that are built up over decades to provide assurance around data, financial data, or what we've been calling non-financial data, but which we increasingly recognize is very linked to financial performance.
Thank you so much, Justin. And I just want to, before we need to get to our outro and final remarks from each of you, just go back to you, Jessica, and go back to this, where to get started, and starting with the food that we eat and that sector, because there are also metrics that need to be audited in that sector, because it really it needs to play the same role as energy has played for the climate transition. It's sort of at the core of all transition plans, is transitioning the food system. And you have at UNIP-FI really dived into both what are some of the innovative financing mechanisms that can be used to transition our food system, but also you are currently designing metrics that together with WEF, I believe, and World Business Council for Sustainable Development. So can you tell us a bit about how you see data coming out of this sector, auditability, that whole discussion, and place it in that sector?
Absolutely. And just as you mentioned, Getting Started. Getting Started is also the title of a publication that will come out alongside the TNFD recommendations, which will give an intro. And UNIP-FI and other partners have been helping the TNFD Secretariat to build this publication based on the piloting experience. So it's quite practical. So we look forward to that. But yes, indeed, food is pretty central to all our lives. Food, air, water, these are the things that, we don't think about until they're absent. And indeed, food systems, food supply chains, food transportation, packaging, shipping are really at the heart of many issues, including climate, nature, labor rights, and gender issues, and all kinds of topics that are of great concern to the UN. So we have been working with a group of leading financial institutions and a number of partners in something called the Good Food Finance Network to try to mobilize and shift finance towards more sustainable food systems. And part of this work has included working on targets and metrics. And as I mentioned, our food systems are quite integrated. And this is also what we see within the TCFD and TNFD assessment and disclosure procedures. So we are working with a high ambition group, which is also a growing group of financial institutions, including banks, insurers, investors, development banks, and others, who are publishing high ambition food system related targets that are integrated across all these topics. So we really do see these as, sort of lighthouse moments. And we're trying to then bring back the leadership in this very integrated space into the existing platforms that we have, including net zero for the various industries that we have, and then work on nature that's happening within our different industry groups. So absolutely, I think that this is a really core central topic. And I know, Global Canopy, who you work for, also finds the food system a key topic in terms of the climate nature interface. And right now, a third of our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from land use change for agriculture. It's also a major driver of biodiversity loss and water use. So there's quite a lot that needs to be joined up. Right now, a lot of the sustainable finance topics have been by impact area and industry, but we also need to think about sectors. And food is really the key sort of joining sector for all of this. So we do have a publication out on driving transformation for sustainable food systems and a number of resources that are out there. And we will have more on this topic coming soon with the growing high ambition group and growing exemplar targets and those experiences from implementing those targets within the financial institutions that are being supported. There's also a joining up of effort to leverage more finance for sustainable food systems. And we look forward to sharing that in the coming months as well.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And we are almost running out of time. So we just have 5 minutes left. So I would like to turn to your closing remark, just in 1 or 2 sentences, replying to the question, what is the first key step an institution need to take, whether a financial service institution or a regulator, to start adopting the TNFD recommendations when they hit the world on the 18th of September. So I'll turn to you first, Axel.
I think to learn about it, to learn about the top level issues, to see how can this be integrated in the current financial and the sustainability related reporting, try to get things organized, what data reporting streams you already have, and then from a materiality perspective, move from that onwards. But again, learning about it, raising attention is a very good start.
Thank you so much, Axel. And your key recommendation, Judson?
Yeah, not to try and do everything at once. Leverage from what you have and the experience you've had from the climate topic, and be patient with yourself and be a bit humble. Obviously, we want to move at pace, but certainly not everything needs to get done in the first instance, and focus on what is material, as Axel said.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Jessica.
Great. Well, I second both of their responses, but I would also add call a friend, join a group. I think there's no time to lose, so we need to share our experiences and lessons, and we can have sort of, closed door sharing and caring where, we're really facing, as Judson outlined earlier, a major transformation of the way our economies work and the way that we conceive of finance. So it's not easy. So reaching out to peers and sharing your experiences and your lessons is absolutely essential.
Thank you so much, Jessica. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you, Axel, Judson, and Jessica. You helped us deep dive and also take a helicopter view at the same time. It was extraordinary. And also building bridges between your different perspectives so we can move forward. We have had an amazing lineup of questions. We've not been able to address all of them. I hope all of you will join Building Bridges in Geneva early October, 2nd to 4th, and also for the launch of the TNFD framework. And we can dive much more into these questions, hopefully in person. What I take from here is really that there's no need to sit and wait for that one metric. It's probably not going to come. We have to navigate complexity. That's the new way of managing portfolios and business models. If we are to shift them to becoming nature positive and decoupled from nature negative impact. But also when the TNFD recommendations hit the world on the 18th of September, that you can start to look at your existing data streams. What are you already doing for climate? And you can get started looking at the most material sectors. So I want to thank Sandrine and the whole team behind Building Bridges, and hoping to see all of you in Geneva, and also for the virtual launch of the TNFD on the 19th and 18th of September. Sandrine, over to you.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Thank you to everyone. And as Marianne said, we hope to meet you in Geneva first week of October. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Have a lovely afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.